So we are 1 p.m. and Darren, you are warmly welcome to be a part of our seminar and tell us about us behind the screen of RAF Museum. So please, you can start your presentation and warmly welcome.
Thank you very, very much. And it's a privilege to be part of such an illustrious lineup. I'm Darren Priday. I'm the manager of the Michael Beetham Conservation Centre at the Royal Air Force Museum in the United Kingdom. I've been with the museum now for 15 years, but the last 7 I've been manager of the Conservation Centre. Previous to that, my background is I'm an aircraft engineer. I served for 26 years in the Royal Air Force. What I've decided to do today, and having had a little chat with the team producing this, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the work that we've done behind the scenes, and then I'm going to finish it off with one of the long-term projects. So not necessarily just concentrating on the one project. Well, the first thing I'd like to just sort of say is I think Mike in his last presentation made some great points about conservation restoration, and it's probably in the forefront of all of our talks, the differences and how you go about typically what the public get to see as an end object, but what Mike brought to fore, and for people that don't work in the industry, is all the hard work, the skills that are there behind, not from just producing, but you saw that great work Mike was doing on Yellow 3 on the paint scheme. But you know, it's just brought forward and showing everybody the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, the research and all that sort of stuff, just to get that object out there. And a little bit, that's what I'm going to be sort of talking about today. So let's just, okay, that's good start. Click my first slide and nothing's happening. That one seems to be working. Yeah, there we go. It's decided to work now. There we go. Yeah, so the Royal Air Force Museum, just to give you a little bit of a background, we are there to tell the story typically just of the RAF in the through its people and its collections. And we again are part of the National Collection, so one of the top. So that puts us down as carers. We do not own any of the objects. We are there just to look after them. And I'm in charge of large 3D objects, and no doubt you'll know what that means, but there you go. There's a list there: planes, helicopters, engines, missiles, vehicles, boats, etc., a long list. And if you take into consideration that at the 2 sites, Hendon or London, whatever you know it as, and Cosford in the West Midlands, we've got about 180 aeroplanes on display. If you start adding in all the other bits and pieces like the engines and the missiles, things like that, you could probably double that amount of objects that we have actually on public display that I sort of have a say over. So quite a large number, but also because we're national, we loan objects out to other museums, and one of my roles is to pop out to these other museums to make sure they're being looked after and not being abused out there. So my remit is the safeguard of the collection for future generations. That's quite simple. We don't fly, we don't do any engine running, and so really is try and keep them there so future generations, like hopefully my grandchildren one day, will be able to visit the RAF Museum and still be able to see Spitfires, Hurricanes, Lancasters, Messerschmitts and all that sort of thing. And that's the best way to safeguard them, is not to fly in my eyes. But in the UK we have obviously lots of flying groups out there, and I think we've got a really good balance between flying display type museums and ground static museums. This is the team, me at the top there, the manager. I have a few other technical trades, but if you notice there, I've got a carpenter, I've got technicians, got metal workers, painters, so I can cover just about all the trades that we need to. But importantly as well, we have the bottom 2 on there, we have 6 apprentices, so we're teaching these skills to the younger generations in the UK, put them out into the workforce for a few years. We never employ any, and then if opportunities come up at the museum, they can willingly apply. But again, the very bottom one there, you can see at the Cosford site alone, I've got 54 volunteers. They don't all come in at once, luckily enough, but they come in for about 5 out of the 7 days of the working week. Similarly, down at Hendon, we have a smaller team. We've got 1 technician who looks after them with a smaller group of volunteers. And it's my team's responsibility if there's any object movements, large object movements going on, like an aeroplane being shifting around or road transported to one of our other museums or our reserve collection. It's up to my team to go down and do that sort of work. The Conservation Centre is named after this gentleman here, Sir Michael Beetham, who ended up being Marshal of the Royal Air Force. Not all Chief of Air Staffs get to that rank. They normally fall 1 rank short. As you can see, he flew 30 ops as a Lancaster pilot in World War II. Caterpillar Club meant he actually had to bail out one time. The badge you get for having to parachute out comes from the silk from the Caterpillar, and the silk being in the parachute. And he had a very, very long, distinguished career, 41 years. Other things he was involved with was bringing the Tornado into RAF service to build up the reserve forces, which the UK military very much relies on this day and age. I should have said we are based, if you don't know, and you know the two sites, we are based at the Cosford site in the West Midlands. What I'm going to do again, and again what Mike picked up on, is the importance of knowing what you're doing with an object when you get to work on it. I'm just going to start off with a few of those projects now. And Sopwith Dolphin was one that we started about 10 years ago and is now on display, and I'll show you a few photographs. And these are the sort of things we were told to do, like getting some new wings manufactured, procure new tires, which is most of you that are trying to find tires for older airplanes will know the issues you can have for that. And I think eventually we ended up getting some from America at great cost to the project. And again, just things like the new Irish linen covering, trying to get your hands on the original fabric material. It is still out there and still available. There's a few places. Interestingly, we don't get it from Ireland anymore. Our suppliers in Belgium. So this is the airplane here, the Sopwith Dolphin. The Sopwith Dolphin was a late war fighter, and it was the world's first single-seat multi-gun designed fighter. It had a couple of guns fitted, one above the pilot's head station and a couple that would fire through the rotating propeller, which I'll show you in a minute. So what we've got there is some original parts in the fuselage only. To be honest, there's nothing for the wings. The wings are complete rebuild from scratch. But again, just the issues when you start looking into trying get these sort of things done. Manufacturing wings, you need 8 pieces of proper wood, no knots in it at all. Spruce was used, and to be just going to the timber supplies and start talking to people and telling them what you're trying to do, and they get very, very interested and want to help you out. And it's their knowledge of the wooden and the trees that they have, and possibly can work for you to cut down to make these pieces. You know, in the end, you don't want any defects. It simply is what I'm saying, and speak to the right people. On the right hand side there, you'll see there's the Spana Sousa V8 water-cooled engine, one of Sopwith, if not Sopwith's very first water-cooled engined aeroplane. And I believe that's where the name the Dolphin came from, because it had a water-cooled engine. But again, this is an engine of probably not fitted, but it was the exact type that would have been used by the Dolphin. We'd strip that down, and it just goes to show the metal grades and the techniques used in those days were as good as they are today. Typically, there was nothing wrong with that engine at all when we stripped it down, had a good look inside. I think there was just one engine shell. It was had a crack in it, but because we're not going to run it, we just left the original part where she was, rebuilt the engine and put it back on display. Just another good shot there of the wing spars, just so you can see how perfect that piece of wood needs to be. Some of the other designs of that period, I've seen lamination, so the spars are made up from 3, 4, 5, 6 different pieces that would be all compressed and glued together. But on here as well, as you can see, there's the beautiful ribs that had to be manufactured. But obviously, when you're trying to do all this sort of stuff, it's very, very fortunate to have drawings available. Sopwith Aviation Company Limited drawing there, and this is one of the technical drawings for the interwing fittings. You've got a complete set of those to manufacture. It's quite easy. You can take these sort of drawings to a modern day pressing company, and they'll probably bang them out for you in a few hours, maybe an odd day or two. But no, we wouldn't do things like that. We want to try and use the techniques that would have been done, and in the end we ended up manufacturing the complete set by hand. Takes a lot longer, but again, we just thought it was the right thing to do, not to introduce the modern day technology, just carry on with the older day skills. Huge big set, trying to think how many of them would be. So you'd have probably 4, 8, probably at least 16 just to hold the wings up. So a lot of those brackets had to be made, and again, they're all out of steel, so quite difficult metals to start drilling and filing, things like that, not quite as easy as your aluminiums. And again, here we go. I mentioned about the forward firing gun on the left hand photo there. You can see the replica casting that we have manufactured for the interrupter gear. And one thing that I really do like when you're working with historic objects is all these markings, and you can see on the original propeller there, the Spana Sousa, and normally gives the brake horsepower on there and things like that. All those sort of things, beautiful, beautiful markings. And there's our interpretation of the cockpit, and it looks very, very nice, neat, and it probably was exactly the same as that in the original build, because the guys that were building these were very, very skilled craftsmen. The aircraft industry, probably about late war, they were probably were aircraft trades, but in the early days of aviation, as we know, there was no such thing as a aviation trades building these sort of thing, and the people that were manufacturing more cabinet furniture makers, so very highly skilled. So the reproduction there is very, very accurate as far as we can see. There's the built aeroplane. Left-hand photo is a photo shoot that we did at the Cosford site outside, and people said to me it looks a little bit like a model. I can guarantee you it's not a model. We all the photos we were looking at, again trying to reproduce originality, all was shown this aeroplane on grass. So this was a January photo, so we actually put it on some camo netting to simulate the grass. And the right-hand photo is the aircraft on public display at the World War I in the air hangar at our Hendon site. Another very, very interesting task that came to us, and this was an overseas task, and you can see on there, and this comes from the British government, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and they asked us if we could we had a simple question they said to us, do you have anything British iconic engineering? That was the sort of 3 words that they used, and straight to us that just meant Spitfire. And then they explained to us they wanted us to, if possible, go to the Middle East, to Kuwait initially, and support a British trade fair out there. So yeah, we got on board and found an aeroplane, but again, she wasn't complete, so she did need some sort of restoration work to make her complete. But again, when you're trying to think about getting her out there, the other major thing that we had to think about was weight reduction, because she was going by air. We had a lot of components missing, you can see there, and including a new engine, of course. And then when you're taking an airplane abroad, what you've got to be very, very strict on is the 2 big things that we certainly come across all the time in this industry is radiation and asbestos. It was quite simple, weight reduction. We could remove all the cockpit gauges, and in the end, we ended up getting facsimiles made. Our museum photographer took some very, very accurate photos, and we had them laminated. And to be truthful with you, from outside the cockpit looking in, you wouldn't have known any different. And the asbestos, we just had all that removed. Anything that we couldn't get removed, like in the firewall, we just had encapsulated, and that covered all that sort of side of it. Again, because she's going out there, we wanted to make sure with all the work going on that we had a new scheme put together. And again, of course, going abroad, we had to manufacture a lot of transportation equipment. And this is the aeroplane. You can see there's no engine, and on the right-hand photo, we didn't have an elevator. So one of the technicians got as much technical information, gone on board, just measured up the back end of this aeroplane, put it all together, and started making us an elevator. That's the sort of skill sets like we've seen in some of the other museums that we have within the conservation centre team at Cosford. And there we go. There's the completed object straight up. But that's all the equipment that you require to take one of these things out and around. And in this case, it was around the Middle East. Initial transportation was going to be out by Kuwaiti Air Force Hercules. So we had dimensions to work to, and those wings were, I think they had about 1 inch clearance to get in the cargo door at the back of the aeroplane. But everything else is boxed up, ready to go, and all the equipment, all our tools, all in one big package. And once you get out to Kuwait City, Kuwaitis wake up morning, suddenly go to the shopping centre and see a Spitfire in the middle of the shopping mall, which is quite interesting. As you can see, the British trade fair going on out there. We were next to McLaren cars. But the interesting thing when you got out there, that the people obviously see the cars a lot, but to actually see a Spitfire in the middle of a shopping mall was proving of great interest to the Kuwaitis out there. And then there was sort of knock-on effects from that as well. Something that I'd learned at the time when I was out there, that during the World War II, there was what was called the Gulf War Fund, and a lot of the Arab nations were collecting money to have them sent to the UK to have Spitfires manufactured. And people were turning up with original photographs and documents from where their family had been involved in this process. So that was a nice little side to being out there and doing this sort of thing. Again, once what happened from there, and we were looking at bringing the airplane back to the UK, and BAE Systems, one of the large aircraft manufacturers in the UK, heard about it, and they were touring the Middle East with their Typhoon replica, plastic replica, and invited us to join. So we ended up going to other places, and this is one place I ended up going, the Ain Airshow in the United Arab Emirates, building it out there. And again, Spitfire in the middle of all this airshow took great pride of place, and there was a lot of interest from the people out there who wanted their photos next to a Spitfire. So it's again coming down to the power of an object. She did go to Bahrain, came back, and then there was a request from Bahrain for her to go back out, so we took her back out there, and and got her into the Bahrain National Museum. And one of the other things that was very, very important with this project, and the reason for the second trip out there, was STEM. There's a big thing: science, technology, engineering, maths, huge in the UK at the moment. And the idea and the concept beyond it is to get the younger generations, get them away from computers and all that sort of stuff, and want them to get in, get learning, and get involved with engineering, and be our next Barnes Wallaces and people like that are designing and doing all these brilliant designs in manufacturing. So that was the idea: get it out there. And I believe there was over about a 2 or 3 day period, 600 Bahraini school children got to come and see the object and learn a lot about the Spitfire and what went into it. But there's also other interesting things when you get out to these sort of places as well, because we get involved with the local communities when we go out there. So we would look for typically an aerospace engineering college, or if not, there's not one available, and invite some of the youngsters, the students that are in there, to come in and get involved with the build with us. We've got to hear a couple of minutes of just how you build a Spitfire on a time-lapse photography. So just going to run that for you, hopefully. There we go. That's how you build a Spitfire in about 2 minutes. You can see that happened over 3 days. And again, we're using it as a learning tool. All the students are getting a lot of education on how to build it, the techniques, like simple things that they probably don't get involved with that we do all the time, like the lifting operations. We're talking through lifting operations and things like that. Just to give you an indication, my team now, we're so used to building out aeroplane from the unload. Once she's there, sat there ready, we build 4 hours and she's on public display. Quite as simple as that. And those keen eyes out there will probably notice all the weight reductions, especially when you look around the wing fold areas. We've removed all the hydraulic pipes, anything like that, even the heavy parts in the wings of the coolers. So we removed them and just simulated the front and back with MDF boards painted up to look like it. And again, it was just all part of the weight reduction, something we would have to do. And just literally before we were meant to be bringing her back to the UK for the final time, we had a visit from the British Royal and the Bahraini Royal families, which was nice to see. So the project benefits like that, obviously international partnerships, and we made a lot of friendships in UAE, Kuwait population, and Bahrain. Of course, on the back of working with something like BA System, a great corporate sponsorship for our museum. And the best bit there, as I say at the bottom though, STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths, getting the units involved, trying to get them inspired to be our next group of engineers at taking us forward in engineering. Another smaller project that I was involved with over the time, and this is on an FE2B. Again, this is an aircraft that was already on display, and we just wanted to enhance its display with a working example of a bomb rack. But again, when we started looking into it, again, plenty of photos to find, and this is what we wanted to try and achieve, the 230-pounder on that centerline bomb rack you can see there. The thing that always makes me I love about this photo is the guy that's on the very right. The look of fear on his face as the guy on the left is putting the fuse in. If it did go bang, I don't think he would know too much about it. You may notice might be over the shoulder of the guy on the left-hand side that there's a propeller. So this is actually a pusher type aircraft rather than a puller one. There's a photo later on. So how do we go about achieving this? The only thing we could come up with was this drawing of the bomb, but it gave us one very, very important piece of information, and that's the dimension across there, 10 inches, 25.4 centimeters for those in the use the metric system. And that one dimension allowed us the whole process to go ahead and rebuild the bomb rack. Again, coming on to some more photos that we'd found of it, again, scaling them up, using that one dimension across that bomb. We blew these up to about A2 size and then accurately measured them with rulers. Again, we did actually then convert to the metric system. It's a finer system than the Imperial British system. But again, it allowed us to start manufacturing. And of course, they asked for a working type in the side on the right hand of the two photos. You might just be able to see the mechanism inside. But again, we found this drawing as well, which gave us the mechanism. So how do we go about making sure we had everything right on here? We just quite simply could work out the dimensions, start and the finish points on the original drawings, how long it all needed to be. We just made some cardboard cutouts and using some pins, put them on the bench until we got everything right. We could pull the actuation and just make sure everything operated. It's a very, very simple one. If you look in the bottom center, you'll see F is the trigger. That just drops down as the tube, which is J, gets pulled back by the big, what they call it on there, crank lever M. That gets pulled and just pulls out, and it literally falls out, and the weight of the bomb just drops off. It's quite as simple as that. Good to know that the one on public display at Hendon, we did put a gag in on the figure 2, where you can see the Teleflex cable going in. We did put a little gag in there so it can't be operated, because this is what we finished that with. And something like this, you know, we try for 100% accuracy, but because of the limitations we have, we're trying to manufacture only from drawings that we'd marked up. We were going to accept anything above about 95% accuracy, but in the end I think it's probably closer to 100%. And there's the aeroplane now on game in Hendon on display in the World War I in the air hangar. You can see the bomb sat quite nicely underneath, and you can see the reason why we need to put a gag in, people wandering around underneath the object. Another one that come into the conservation centre probably in the last 18 months or so, Westland Lysander. She was on public display down at Hendon. This is all completely covered in Irish linen again, and obviously you're fully aware that Irish linen being left indoors starts to deteriorate with time, because very, very brittle, very much like paper. And it got to that stage where she was looking very, very tatty on display. We tarted her up as best we could with patches, but in the end the museum was having a major change around of the Hendon site and decided to take her up to the conservation centre so we could get a new fabric covering on. Really, we're going to do a full inspection, but again, thinking what Mike was saying about the conservation side, it was nothing more than just a few minor repairs, mainly inside the wings where some of the wooden structures had broken that we just had to repair, but the rest of it was just give her a good clean and put her back on display eventually as she would have been. But there were a couple of things that we were asked again to enhance the display, and that was the manufacture of a ladder and a fuel tank, and again a new surface finish there at the bottom. This is an actual original photograph of our aeroplane. So from that, one of the volunteers, he doesn't live in the UK, and he's very, very closely involved with the project. He lives out in Switzerland, a British guy, again, David Upton. From all the drawings, he produced a very, very accurate and detailed scheme of the paint scheme for us. So once we completely recovered the outside, we could put the paint scheme to the exact right place, and there's our interpretation of what he said. And again, it's probably 99% accurate. We just literally finished actually putting the wings on yesterday, and We're just having a look at the paint lines, making sure they match up and things like that at the moment. A couple of other things, and there you go. There's the photograph of what I knew I had one. And there we go. There's the ladder which we've got to manufacture. As you can see, it's a ladder that's actually fitted on the outside. The reason being, this aeroplane was used in the later parts of the war for the special ops, so sort of flying into France to drop off the spies, if you want a better word to use for them. So allowed them quick access or egress from the aeroplane, but also there you go as well for the, they were carrying a fuel tank underneath. So we started looking into the manufacture of the fuel tank. We did find a Westlands drawing with this on, but quite interestingly, quite a lot of dimensions and information on there. But very interesting, on the bottom we saw this Handley Page Harrow. So we thought this must come from another airplane. So we started looking through the Harrow documentation, and we suddenly found this, and we thought, there we go, we found what the tank is. Searched our collection. Unfortunately, we didn't have a fuel tank anywhere in our reserve collection, so we had to look at manufacturing. Again, from all the drawings and everything, we got a very, very good scale, what the size was like and things like that. And that's as far as we got so far. We've got the pressings to make the fittings between that and the fuselage, and that's our next task, along with the ladder. The ladder is in progress at the moment. Again, fortunately, we have no drawings, so it's sort of trying, no technical drawings, so it's trying to interpret any photographs that we've got. I put a bit of logic in it. Lucky enough that the attachment brackets are still there on the outside of the aeroplane, so we got certain information to go from. One thing that I don't know if you notice, going back to the original photograph, if any of you have got really keen eyes, but this little area here. So when you're doing a rebuild on an airplane like this, restoration, so as you can see, that's technically incorrect. The person that put it on, I don't really know why they put it that way around. You can quite clearly see which way those two panels, the engine cooling gills, should be fitted. So when you put it back on display, do you put it technically correct or historically correct? I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do. If you want to see, you'll have to come to Hendon when she goes on display in a year or so's time to have a look at what our interpretation of that photograph. A few other things that we've been involved with over the years is just really looking at some of the objects that are on public display. Because again, I think it was something that Mike was saying, these objects are on display a long, long time ago. And the standards in those days are probably not to the same standards that we want to work to in this day and age. But again, correctness of builds, and obviously enhancing public experience, but obviously making sure that they are safe. TSR2, and one thing we started doing on this one is taking all the panels off. This would have probably gone into the museum in the 70s, 80s, that sort of time, so 20, 30 years ago, comfortably, and would never have been built by anybody. It's at the museum now. So we started to look and wanted to make sure everything was okay. When we got to this big, all singing, all dancing tailplane on the aeroplane, it's a one-piece tailplane. We took off the fit panel, and this is what we found. So you know, you've got this huge big piece of metal above the public. It was held on properly at the far end, but the outside end there, as you can see, they couldn't even be bothered to put the bearing. It's probably too much hassle for them to try and get in and fitted, and they just chucked 4 pieces of wood in. They had used oak, fair play to them, but as you know and I know, that's technically not correct. We were very, very fortunate to have a lot of spares from the TSR2, which is the cancelled British project, and went through, and we actually found a bearing. We couldn't find any nuts, but we have one manufactured, and just to make sure that we have no issues in later life, we made a nice big washer, for want of a better word, to put on the end with the nut. As you can see, we've painted it red. To us, that indicates that these are not original parts. It's parts that we've added at a later date, and we put some witness marks on there so we can watch for creep. It shouldn't move. We're not going to fly. It's really only if it vibrates when we or tries to move around a little bit when we're ground moving this airplane. But every couple of years we'll have a look at those creep marks, making sure that there's no movement there. But again, following on from what I'm just saying about 1970s, 1980s restoration, when you get up on top of that airplane, this is what you see. To me, that's graffiti. It's awful. It's damage. It's worst case. And why people would even think about that then, I really don't know. It's quite simple. Why not just put your bracket there? You've got some existing holes. Just too lazy. That's all I can think. Just just got to drill out wallop half a dozen tucker pops in. You go, a couple of hours extra work drilling, taking out some screws, drilling the holes to match, and just stick it in there. Yeah, it's unbelievable, really, to think that people would even do that, even though that period ago. Nimrod upon public display. Again, sometimes we've received objects, and this is one that's open for public tours, and inside they've been stripped out before they come to us. Some of the stuff is still in use in other aeroplanes in the RAF or on maybe on the secret list, and we can't have them. So what we end up doing is replicating. And what I'm looking at here is the Avalon box. One of them is an original photo from the flying days, and the other one is inside our display aeroplane. Even though it won't operate as an Avalon box, which is like a tape recorder, we've used a Raspberry Pi to make the display look exactly the same, where the tape would go in. We've got that mechanism in. The back of the box is just a shell, but for what the public get to see, what would be there is quite remarkable. It's very, very difficult to see the difference. And just to let you know the difference, there we go. The one on the left is an original photograph. The one on the right is one of the ones manufactured by one of the guys in my team. And again, something very, very simple like an engine, especially a cutaway, where the public can get to see inside. We got our electricians on board in this, and as you can see, using modern day technology out there, LED lighting, you can put a display with the engine on and the graphics to explain how an engine works, but also the temperature ranges within the engine. But also with this one, we actually got the engine is rotating and there's a PIR. So as people approach, it will kick in and the engine will start rotating. So, you know, something very, very simple, which turns an object into a very, very interesting object. And a few other examples that we've done around the museum itself is in the National Cold War exhibition at Cosford, and the left-hand photo is we've removed the door from the Valiant. The right-hand photo is open the door on the Victor, and just allow the public just to get inside to have a little look where the aircrew are, and it turns an object again into an object where they can see how people would have sat, see how people would have operated these airplanes when they were flying. The middle photo is a Czechoslovakian BMP personnel carrier, again by just opening the doors up, putting a little bit of low wattage LED lighting in there. It turns the object again into something that's a talking point for families. And I think the main talking point is, would you want to be in that and being fired at? I know the answer, and that's no. The reason being those two big doors you can see on the back double up as fuel tanks. So if you're going to get out, the one place you don't want people shooting at is the fuel tank area, and you have to run past it. So I'm not brave enough to want to get into something like that. So that's sort of a lot of the work that we've been involved with over the years, and there's a lot of other projects and a lot of other aircraft moves that we've been doing. But one thing I just wanted to spend a little bit more time, the rest of my time, I've got about 15 minutes or so, is just to try and get through the museum's longest term, and without doubt probably the one project object that we have in the collection that we know so much about, because apart from it, and I think the important bit and that is more than a restoration. Yes, it's quite easy just to go and do a restoration, but just to learn about the object and the people that flew them and things like that, we put so much effort into learning all that as well with this object. So I'll just take you through about it. And that's the aircraft in question, the Handley Pre-Hampden, and it came from B932, 32 being the year. So you can date the Hampden back to 1932. That's when pen would have hit paper. And from the details that come out, which is twin engine medium day bomber with appreciable more performance than its predecessors. The predecessors of the Hampden, and the other one they talked, which is the Vickers Creasy, which went on to become the Wellington we were talking about now. These are metal biplanes, and you know, this is a total radical design. We're going to single wing aeroplanes, things like that. And there you go, there's a cross section of the Hampden. There's a few interesting bits on there, and this is one of the very first, and this is a sort of very early technology of slats. There's a lot of thoughts about improvement of aerodynamics, takeoff landing, with having actually operational slats rather than spring operated slats, and also little things like the tail wheel was retractable. So again, this is sort of all new technologies that were coming into an airplane, and she first flew in 1936. Not very, as you can see from that photograph, very, very narrow external dimension. It's somewhere right, the cockpit is only 36 inches. I think I've got the conversion later on into metric as well. So again, talking about the information, where was she built in the UK? Three sites. The main site was at Radlett, which is just north of London, Salisbury, which is at Wharton, BA Systems up that area, and then also in Northern Ireland at the Shorten Harland in Belfast. And there's an important point to knowing those three sites, which I'll cover in a little bit later in the presentation. And the service career of the Hampden, 38 right the way through, and I was surprised when I looked into this side of it as well. She was still going into the 44s. But what I'm going to talk about is the one object P1344 that we have in our collection now. and what happened to her. And you can see on their Operation Orator, and this was to protect the Arctic convoys. The PQs were the numbers, PQ and the number that was given for the routes, and PQ-17, to be truthful with you, took a huge hit. I think there was something like 42 merchant ships and something like 28 were lost. So it was a huge loss. And what we're talking on here is ships going from the UK up around Iceland as far as the ice sheet will allow, really, and then dropping into a place called Archangel in northern Russia, delivering them war aids. That's probably food, tanks, and munitions, and all this sort of stuff. So it's a vital supply line that the Allies needed to keep open. So after the huge hit of the PQ-17 for PQ-18, which was going to be the last one in that route, the Air Force stepped in and said, what we'd like to do is send 32 Hampdens, 32 out there, 16 from 144, 16 from 455, Royal Australian Air Force Squadron based in the UK, and they'd be operating out in Russia. And you can see on there is also the Tirpitz was up in the Norwegian fields as well, as she decided to pull up anchor and start sailing. Another thing that we look at doing is possibly using the Hampdens to go and attack. These were converted from being a bomber, which was at the early war days. The variants that went out to northern Russia had all been converted to carry torpedoes. Again, crew list here, and this is the 144 squadron list of the 16 crews that went out to Russia. And just to put some faces, come up with this photograph as well. Unfortunately, whoever had this photo had hindsight to stick all the names of everybody on the back, so we could work out. The one guy off that list that I'm going to talk about in a while is Perry in the bottom left corner, because he was the pilot on aeroplane. So, excuse me a second, getting very dry, just need a very quick mouthful. Sorry about that. So the blue line there is really sort of an indication of what was trying to happen with the Arctic convoys. They're going out of Scotland, out around Iceland, going high up as they can, and into this place called Archangel. So what was happening with the Hampdens? Initially, they were in Lucas in Scotland, and then they made their final UK voyage, which was taking flight across to Sombra and the Shetland Islands, and that was the last time they'd be on British soil. Then on the night of the 4th and 5th September 1942, all 32 aircraft left Sombra and flew that track up the coast of Norway before cranking a right and looking to hit the airfield at Afrikander. That was the main place, but there were a few other airfields to try and land at in that area. Final destination was the other red one, slightly higher up, called Vaenga. But the reason they didn't go directly to Vaenga was because of this place called Petsamo. That was a Luftwaffe base up in that part of the world, so they were trying to avoid that, and then they would do the hop up the following day. Sadly, of the 32 aircraft, we lost over a quarter. 9 didn't get there. In human life, that meant 16 were lost on active service or killed in action. 13 ended up as POW, 16 did survive. And again, there's a breakdown of the crews. The ones in white were the ones that were okay. The ones in the lighter green shade ended up as POWs. But sadly, I think you can work out what the pinky shade ones mean with the K. 6 of the aircraft were 144 and 3 came from the Australian Air Force Squadron. And again, doing some of the research, come across this logbook entry. Squadron Leader Foster, he was second in command of 144 Squadron. And there you go, you got to Sombra. So that's a trip from Lucas up to Sombra, 1 hour 35 flight. Then on the 4th, 5th September, ops to Russia. He ended up at another airfield, Monchsky Gorsk, if that's the correct pronunciation. Then took the following day the trip up to Vaenga. And then the Barents Sea sweep of 7 hours 35. Operating time for Hampden typically is about 8 hours. So 7 hours 35 would be their safety window for them to get back in. And that's what we mean. There's the blue line again of the boat, the convoys trying to come in, and the red line there was the Hampden sort of sweep area. Other airplanes were involved, but that's the routes that the Hampdens were asked to take. Just sort of put up this shield, fly around for 7.5 hours to try and keep the German Navy and the Luftwaffe away. What happened to our aeroplane? Instead of following the red line, we do know it was struggling with icing problems. And when she started to try and take the right-hand turn and go across Northern Europe, at that point, navigation not being exactly the same as it is today, she ended up going slightly further north and then ended up flying to Petsamo. Whilst over Petsamo, it took some ground fire, but also witnessed 2 Messerschmitt 109s take off and engage which eventually shot the aeroplane down. Crew on board, Navigator, Canadian Air Force, so he was in the front nose section, and his objective would have been to try and keep the pilot informed of whether the two 109s were coming in and attacking the aeroplane. Sad to say, he did survive the air battle, but sadly when the aircraft crash landed, he was killed. There's a history record of Miller, and the very last one there's underlining, says missing with the date 4/9/42 on it. Sadly, yes, he was killed. Robertson, he was the wireless operator air gunner on the flight that night. He was on his first operation out of training. Sadly, he was killed during the air battle. His son has donated his father's medals to the museum to go with the project when she finally goes on display. The air gunner, don't have any information. We do know his name, Daniel Garrity, and he was from the Gorbals area of Glasgow. We're still trying to find the family, but research so far, we haven't been able to come up with any. Sadly, he was also killed during the air battle. Fortunately, it gets a bit better from that. Pilot, Esmond Perry, he went and survived the crash landing. He was hurt, without doubt, and he ended up getting captured eventually by the Germans, and he went through the processes, and he ended up in Camp 3 for the rest of the war in Germany. At the end of the war, he was involved in the long marches, death marches, however you may know them, time after spending all that time as a POW than to go through something like that. But he did come back. He did serve eventually 26 years in the RAF. That was a typical crew, actually. I never mentioned about the crew members on the airplanes. There should only be 4, but because where they were going out of area into Russia, there were a 5th one on board, and these were all the technicians, so 32 technicians trying to get out there. Again, guy underlined there, Corporal George Shepherd, he was an engine fitter. He was the one that was sat in our aeroplane. It was having the ride out there. Again, there's George, his training days, which I believe was most likely from RAF St Athan, place I served at during my career. Again, his family donated some of the documents that they found in his collection, and his top left is handwritten technical training notes, which is obviously very much of interest to me. That will go with the project. There's dear George. He was about, I think, 92 when we met him, which has been about 10-12 years ago. Sadly, he passed away within 12 months of us meeting him, but the main thing was he did get to see his aeroplane that he was involved in that crash landing. Just to keep the family connection going, that's me there on the left, and that's young Bethany, George's great-granddaughter, who came to work for us in the NBCC for a couple of weeks on a work experience trip. Just in front of us is the wing box section from the Hampden that was recovered, and that seat there you can see is where George would have been sat, so we got Beth working on that. There's the Hampden fuselage behind. So what happened? There's the crash site in the part of the world. I'm not sure if it's Russia or Norway or Sweden, whatever. I don't really know, to be honest, and maybe I'll have to look into it. I think it's probably behind the Iron Curtain at the moment. But when she was brought back to the UK, that's what we were given. And the idea really would be initially to concentrate on the fuselage and not worry too much about the wing. But as you can see, the majority of the forward fuselage is just not there. The 2 engines were recovered. So we did start the work, and then when we started looking at the objects, we can start finding these sort of things, the bullet hole, shrapnel damage. There's more bullet holes there, but also again, when you start looking through some of the bits of the object, you start finding these sort of things. Typical area, the weak area, on the photographs on the left there, the tail boom where the Hampden snapped, would snap off, and the piece in the middle is an engine bearer casting, very, very solid piece. It has to take the weight of the engines and all the flying load to the engine, and that buckle twisted and snapped and with the impact. And again, very similar to what we've seen in the other presentations, the propellers from the crash landing. Again, on the side that Mike was on about the conservation argument against restoration, there was a fire on board the airplane, and we believe this would have been the source of the fire. I can mark it up for you. A bullet hole that had come in through. That's where all the wiring loom had gone. All the wiring had disappeared when the aircraft recovered. This was in an area in very north of Russia, most likely stripped out by the locals, and all the bits and pieces, all the wirings removed, probably used for snares, things like that. Interestingly, there were mechanically cut holes in the top of the wings, and all the fuel tanks had gone out of the airplane. So quite a lot of being borrowed by the locals at the time. So yeah, going back to this piece here, we thought this was probably the most likely source of the fire, the arcing out of the wiring in there. So again, we just conserved this piece, and in the end, all we've done is just put some Renaissance wax on it. Mentioned about the sites or the Hampdens were manufactured at. Ours would come P1344 come from the Radlett factory, but while we were looking at the object on the bottom of the wing, P2133, that would have been manufactured at the Salisbury plant, L6012, and you can just about make out the red markings of P1344 on top. That's the original paint to the L6012. That would have been manufactured at the sorry, my headphones a bit. That would have been manufactured at the Shorten Highlands in Belfast, and that's actually from a Hereford aeroplane, which was a stablemate of the Hampden. The only difference was being the engines. Only 100 of them were manufactured compared to 1,430 Hampdens. It was not a good aeroplane, but what these two photos do show, the interchangeability that was being put into the build at the time. Again, we're fortunate enough to have all the technical drawings. I'm just looking at my time. I've probably got about another 15 minutes to go, so I'm going to try and speed up a bit like Mike did and maybe just end it short. The drawing on the left there, again, apart from a final surface finish on this, because there was a little bit of corrosion coming in the museum, wanted us to do that. All the bits on there are original. We just had to unseize them, and there she is in fitted. And that's one of the mechanisms for clutching up and locking the torpedoes into position in the bomb bay. Quite simply, a piece like this to come off, and that's the handhold, the place where you put through to operate the mechanism we've just seen before. But if you don't have any technical drawings from this is one piece, you can do a bit of forensics, and you can gather so much information to help you with restoration, the grain, types of wood, all that sort of thing, where rivets have been fitted, types of screw, and simple little things you can see on the right-hand photo at the top. I put rust steel screws. You've got an aluminium, then you've got the interaction between the two different metals, and you've got a little brown circle of rust there. So it just shows you that steel will be used. So there's so much information in that one piece that we can use in a project. That's the forward fuselage that was returned, and quite easily we could have incorporated that into design. But what the museum had decided, and again I'll cover that in a minute, is for us to make a replica or a new fuselage section, but that can go on display next to the original object. So that will be just purely conservation on that. Put a nice stand, not on the egg box. So from a drawing like that, we started going through manufacturing, started taking shape onto the tail boom, the rear fuselage. Again, the majority of this, it's probably about 90-95% of this is original. There were a few bits and pieces we had to get involved with. The tail boom itself, we looked at the original tail boom, and again, trying to get a fit for display, structural stability and all that in it, we would have lost the majority of the original structure. So we went for a replica with the idea of putting the original on display. This is where we did it, put some original bits, the very far left, the outboard bit of the tail, the fin, the main structure of the rudder, and underneath the Irish linen covered was all original. The centre box section, and it was similar to the left hand side, the right hand side. The elevator itself is new. So there's a lot of bits here that we have incorporated into the final design to manufacture that. Engine, again, we had two engines come back, but from the two we've made one good one. Not complete, and there's certainly one ring inside which must have taken an impact that was shattered on both, which you haven't been able to get. But again, on a long-term restoration like this, we can always keep an eye out and try and get one piece if we wanted to. So I'm rushing through a little bit now, but this is what we've got to. This is our fuselage at the moment. It's a fair representation, and just to give you an idea, tailplane 40% roughly original, complete replica on the tail boom, rear fuselage 95% original, and the forward fuselage the replica. But again, the display options was looked at by the museum. The original tail boom, because we're going to put it on display probably in that orientation, we can put the original tail boom there underneath, and the original forward fuselage can be put on a suitable trestle for people to see and get a feel what she would have been like, these original parts, and have a good look. Again, interest points, talk points. But the other interesting thing, not doing the wings just yet, is why you've got this area here, which we can allow the public in to have a little look at the object. And again, a lot of our problems at you get an aviation museum is the ability to be able to see inside, hence why we've taken doors off some airplanes at this time, but visitor viewing can go in there, and typically this is what they'll see, and this is the views of our airplane, one looking back. And there I do have the conversion, I thought I had it somewhere, the 36 inches, 91.4 centimeters, that's the external dimension, so incredibly narrow for 4 or on normal operations, or 5 on this one to be inside. And the pilot station there again, where we can, like you can see the seat, something that Mike brought up again as well, is the seat there is not the original seat, but we did some research and we found one we had in the collection that came from a Hampden, so we prioritised using that in the project. But a lot of the instruments that's fitted in the restoration are genetic ones, so we have no history in knowing where they fitted to Hampdens in the past, or if they've ever been fitted to an aeroplane. The other interesting point I just want to try and cover through, and I'll try and whip through this, is again is the social side, getting to know these people. And John Matthews, he was in the Wing Commanders, and again he had this great logbook, and he had lots of information. His information there about going out. This is when I met him about 7-8 years ago. He was 95 then. He had lots of information still in his collection. I hope the family understand all the value on this. When I was looking through his logbook as well, he flew with our Perry, who was a pilot of ours, and also another guy who was one of the very first people that I met, Peter McDermott. And he was Peter. He came to see us in the early days, and there you see the Hampden fuselage. That's Jim, not one of my volunteers, and Rebecca, who was my apprentice at the time. He came, but again with him, he brought lots of information. He had this little notebook, which was highly illegal, about a crashed aeroplane. Hampden, again, I think he flew 30 ops. And there's the text from it, which we've translated from his doctor writing. This was the kite that I nearly pranged before. I thought that was a great phrase. 30 ops with the same crew. I think they had one broken finger, which is incredible to think on a plane like the Hampden, which is an early war airplane. And that's the airplane he's talking about. We do have the mirror from that one in our collection. I'm going to whip through a few, as I say now. Ben Dixon was another guy we got to meet. Her name was Grace, who was one of the best, but there came a night when I gave her the test. I looked at her with joy and delight, for she was mine for the whole of the night. She looked so slim, so pretty, so pretty, so sweet, so slim. The night was dark, the lights were dim. I was so excited, my heart missed a beat, for I knew that night I was in for a treat. I'd seen her stripped, I'd seen her bare, I felt all round her, I felt everywhere. But this was a night she was mine for the test. We started her off, she screamed with joy, for this was her very first night with a boy. I got as high as quick as I could, I handled her well, her response was good. I turned her over, then right on her side, then on her back always I tried. It was one great thrill, she was the best in the land. An engine hand and a bomber command. Again, this is what we found. This, you can see, Fred ended up sadly as a POW, but it came from his wartime log. And there's the old Fred coming to see us, and that's the area he had a crash landing in a Hampden. Just to show that it's not all blokes that we meet. And this was Ruth. She was working at the English Electric Preston and Salisbury factory doing all the fabric work. So there's a good chance it's this young lady here, sat in the middle, could have done the work on our Hampden, all the fabric work, and she was going out to do the battle damage repairs, and she brought so much information to us about the fabric work. On the last couple now, Max Mayer, again, to sort of show you Max, 61 ops in a Hampden, visited every major German city. This is when I met Max just after his 100th birthday. He'd be 102. And there we go, 61 ops. There we go, Fred Hill. Fred is someone I've met on quite a few occasions, and various photos of Fred. And Fred now is about 97, 98, still with us. And when he came to meet us on our Hampden, and again another one with a huge CV from the World War II, 32 ops on a Hampden, 55 in Mosquito, so 87 ops, and 23 of those were over Berlin and managed to survive. And then you think about Robertson, who was on ours, who was killed on his very, very first operation. Incredible that someone like Fred could survive that long. Thought it was should rightly end with a photograph of the families of the crew that were on board, including the Canadian families that came to see us. You were raised in foreign lands, but Great Russia keeps you faithfully in a grateful memory, like a mother remembering her favourite sons. This is a memorial at the crash site that was put there by the Russians. Graveyard not found. We do know that the graves were taken to the German cemetery at Petsama, and they were bulldozed at the end, so there's no chance of recovering the 3 bodies. Sorry, I had to be rushed a little bit at the end there. I wasn't sure how long it would take. It's taken me about 53, 54 minutes. So if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to come forward and ask.